The next section on motherboards is those external things that we can plug into our motherboard to make our computer usable, those being the hard drive connectors, and how we connect permanent storage up. We know that permanent storage is what we save all of our data on, all of our operating system on, and it matters what kind of connections we have. And we're going to talk about basically, really kind of briefly, it's pretty simple, the different kind of connections that we have and what we need to look at when we're buying a new motherboard. So basically there's only two ways to connect up drives to a motherboard. There's Sata Connectors, which stands for Serial ATA or AT Attached Connectors, and there's M.2 connectors, this top one, and this one connects from the side on this motherboard. These are Sata connectors, and this is an M.2 connector on this particular computer. There we go. Didn't need that out there. So serial AT attached ports, or SATA ports, can be plugged in up and down like these 4 are here, or on the side like these 8 are here. You can have 2, you could have 4, you could have 6, you could have 8, you could have 10, you could have 16. It all depends on the motherboard how many connections you can have. Each one of those can connect up to one device, whether it's a hard drive, a CD-ROM, a Blu-ray, a DVD burner, whatever your external device is that uses SATA. Each one of those has a single connection. You can see the little L bracket inside there. It can only go one way in there. Now, SATA has evolved since it came out. The original SATA, now called SATA 1, transferred at 1.5 gigabits per second, which basically meant an effective throughput of 150 megabytes per second. That they could transfer. SATA 2 was double that at 300, and SATA 3, which is the current SATA level out today, transfers up to 600 megabytes per second, or you might see it say 6 gigabits per second. Those are synonymous, and you could see SATA 3 written either way. Most motherboards today, for every SATA port, most of them are going to be SATA 3. I don't think I've seen a modern one today that isn't, but you can see SATA connects up to a maximum speed of 600 megabytes per second. And I could put any number of drives inside this depending on how many SATA ports the specific motherboard has. M.2 connectors are a newer kind of connector, and they use a totally different channel on the motherboard. They use the PCIe channel for the really fast ones. But M.2 can either be SATA or PCIe, also annotated as NVMe on a motherboard. And this is important to point out right here, that an M.2 on SATA still only communicates at 600 megabytes per second, whereas an M.2 on the PCIe channel, or designated as an NVMe drive, is basically 6 times that fast, 3,500 megabytes per second. So M.2 drives are newer and far faster than a traditional SATA. However, that being said, motherboard manufacturers make M.2 ports that work both ways through SATA and PCIe. So it's really important when you make the purchase, you make sure the motherboard supports PCIe for the faster performance. I'm not sure why you would buy an M.2 SATA drive if it's got the same speed as a normal SATA drive. We'll look at some prices and I'll explain that even better. But you want to get one that's PCIe, uses that PCIe or NVMe channel to get the maximum speed that you could. And believe me, that 6 times faster makes a difference. When you've got a M.2 drive that's 2 terabytes and a traditional SATA drive that's 2 terabytes, you really do notice a difference on how fast things load up and how fast they're both readable and writable. And this is what an M.2 drive looks like going into that slot. These are M.2 slots. This particular motherboard has 2 of them. They kind of slide in to that connection, and then this is the screw spot. After you slide it in, they go down, and a screw goes into an M.2 drive right there to hold it in place. These aren't take them out, put them in kind of things. Usually you put them in when you create your systems and mount your motherboard and install your operating system on them so that they could be as fast as possible. Although we use them for data drives as well on things like our Moodle server and our main data servers here at National Trail. So this is an example of two M.2 drives that you might look at and say, hey, which one do I want to get? It's important that you read the fine print. This one, this Samsung 860 EVO, is currently listed as of today. It's a 2 terabyte M.2 drive, but it's on SATA 3. It's $559 for this. It looks very similar to this one that's M.2, but look, this 2 terabyte one is only $299. You would actually be paying more for something that goes 5 times plus slower than the other one. And another comparison is just comparing that same M.2 drive with a traditional SATA drive. These are both Samsung 860 EVOs. They're both the same model. This one has an M.2 connector. This one has a traditional SATA connector. They're both SATA 3, but this one's $275 and this is $560. Yes, I rounded there. So when you're looking at drives and when you're looking at motherboards, you need to look at what are my connections? Are they SATA? Do they have M.2? And are those M.2 PCIe or are they SATA connections on the M.2 channel? So let's take a look at a motherboard right here. This is one that's on sale on Newegg today. And if I look down there, I may or may not be able to pick out if it's got an M.2 drive. So I'm going to go down, or slot, but I'm going to go down here to the specifications on it and take a look at the storage section here to see what all this particular motherboard does, and that's what the storage section is about. First of all, it points out it's got a B450 chipset. It's got 4 SATA 6 gigabits per second port. Those are SATA 3 ports. So you've got 4 SATA ports available on this one. And it goes on to say it's got 2 SATA 6 gigabit ports unavailable when installing an M.2 slot. So it's got 4 that are always there. It's got another 2 that use this M.2 slot right here. So what does that tell you about that M.2 slot? I would be leery because it's using that channel, but let's look. It says one M.2 supports PCIe 3.0, X4, first, second, and third generation. Why is it even saying that on the storage devices? Oh, there we go. With blah, 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 here we go. SATA, 6 gigabit per second, standards, 2242, blah, 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 storage device. This motherboard has an M.2 spot. That M.2 spot uses the SATA channel here, and it's a SATA M.2 spot. So buying this motherboard, yeah, it's got an M.2, but it'll only take a SATA M.2. So if you were buying it to be a fast system, this is a bad motherboard to choose. Let's go back and look at another one. I'm going to go down here. We're just going to pick the next one on here and take a look at this one and see what it's got in the specs. Again, we're going to go down to storage devices. It's got 4 SATA 6 gigabit per second, 2 M.2 spots. From AMD supports M.2 spot for AMD chipset. Oh, there we go. So it's got 2 M.2. One of them uses SATA. The other one uses PCIe, so it's got both. So I've got a slot on here that does SATA speed, which is not that much different than just using a SATA hard drive, but one of them supports PCIe 3.0 X4, meaning that it's got to get that 3,500 megabytes per second transfer speed as opposed to the SATA one. The other one, it's only going to get 600, and it says 6 gigabits. We know it's also 600 megabytes per second. So the difference between those two slots on that one, you've got both kinds, only one of them is going to give us the performance that we want. So I wanted to point that out. When we're looking at motherboards, we need to take time to read about the storage devices that we can connect up to, and those caveats of, hey, it's got M.2, but you can't use two of the SATAs if you use that to M.2. Those things we need to know when purchasing our motherboard so that we get what we want. If we wanted to put in an M.2 in 4, 5, 6 other devices, now we're being restricted by the motherboard and the chipset. So we need to pay close attention to that. And that's it really for storage devices. SATA, M.2. M.2's got two options, SATA and NVMe or PCIe connections. The PCIe is 3,500 megabytes per second. SATA is only 600, so you get those huge advantages by using an M.2 drive.